The Long Haul Podcast, America's Irish voice. Interviews with inspiring immigrants, renowned Irish personalities, and discussions on all things Irish America. Presented by Michael Dorgan.
At the door to me away, you Santi, my dear Annie.
Welcome along to this week's edition of the Long Haul Podcast, where the 42.IE's Gavan Casey is back to give us a preview on Katie Taylor's upcoming fight against Karen Carabajal this Saturday in London. Katie puts all her world lightweight titles on the line against the unbeaten Argentinian, although she isn't expected to cause too many problems for the Irish Olympic gold medalist. Although we usually only cover Irish topics or Irish sporting events here in America, I felt it was worth keeping tabs on Katie this weekend, given she is based in Connecticut and of course has fought stateside many times before. Gavan also gives us an insight into why the Amanda Serrano rematch in Croke Park didn't materialize this year, and he tells us if he thinks that megafight will happen next year, or will we see Katie trading leather with the likes of MMA superstar Kris Cyborg back in Madison Square Garden or in Las Vegas. We also look back on the sensational success of Ireland's female boxers at the European Championships last weekend, with gold for Kelly Harrington, Amy Broadhurst and Aoife O'Rourke. I have Gavan Casey from the 42 calling in from Ireland, from Cork. I believe you're in Cork, Gav, today. Ireland's preeminent boxing journalist, so we're going to take a look ahead to the Katie Taylor's fight Saturday against Karen Carabajal. Did I pronounce that right, Gav? It's her first fight since of course the spectacular, the classic, the legendary fight back in earlier this year in Madison Square Garden against Amanda Serrano. Gav, what are we looking ahead to this Saturday? Is it a matter of Katie getting back on the road again after taking maybe a longer break than after previous fights?
Yeah, I think it is just a stay busy fight, Mike. And we know the extent to which she's actually addicted to competing and addicted to boxing, even at her grand old age now as a professional athlete. And as you say, there was a little bit of a longer break that probably would have been required after the damage that she took in the Serrano fight, in fairness, particularly in that fifth round, albeit I think she was back in the gym only 3 or 4 days after that fight. You want to give a little bit of pause, obviously, for the body to recover, and you don't want to be going and taking shots again, full-blooded shots again like that so soon. And I think with this fight, it's just keeping Taylor happy and keeping her active. She would have been desperate to get out before Christmas. She'd probably come home then to Ireland for Christmas and spend it with family. So just squeezing in a fight before then. And with an eye, I think, still on a Serrano rematch, we hope in Ireland next year, which I know we'll get on to. So yeah, it's. I don't want to be disrespectful to Carabajal, but I think it is a bit of a box-ticking exercise. She is an unheralded opponent, and I think it's more so about getting Katie back in the news a little bit, get people talking about her again, and maybe drumming up a little bit of the hype for a rematch that might have been lost in the last few months as it fell apart initially. Anyway.
So it is a title. It is a title fight. All the belts are on the line again. Carabajal, she's Argentinian. I don't think she's fought outside her country before. But these, let's be honest, we're expecting her to win. But at the same time, she's a professional. She's going to take it seriously. She knows what's ahead of her. It's do you see any upset on the card, or do you see any chink in her armor come Saturday night?
I won't lie, I don't know a great deal about Carabajal, and from what I've seen, I can't imagine a situation in which she troubles Taylor. She's just not good enough from what I've seen. At the same time, we've seen fighters of Taylor's age in their mid-30s grow old overnight or between fights, or sometimes between rounds, as Mickey Ward discovered once against Arturo Gatti in that third fight of their classic trilogy. So I guess you can never write anything off, but I would just be absolutely stunned if Carabajal is even especially competitive in this fight. I'd see it being a fairly clear points victory for Taylor. She hasn't had a stoppage win in a while. Maybe she gets back on that particular train this time around. And as I say, I think it's almost not about the opponent. Again, with the greatest respect to Carabajal, it's almost more like giving Taylor a show, having people talking about Taylor, and just through that attention and that sort of, I guess, engagement with fans, getting the drum beating again for Croker next year, we hope.
Yeah, so do you think that's going to happen? And I know you've kind of you might have the inside scoop as to how it fell apart a couple of months ago. We were all on a high. We all thought it was going to happen maybe September, but I think it was hard to get that together in such a short space of time. Garth Brooks was there for a couple of nights, and then as you know, Croke Park is limited. So was it ever going to happen, or what really happened that it didn't come to fruition?
No, I mean, from Taylor's point of view and from her side of the equation, it absolutely was going to happen. And Brian Peters, her manager especially, had put in an enormous amount of work in order to make it happen. The GA, as far as I know, were completely on board with it and were actually excited by the prospect of it. Croke Park officials there themselves absolutely on board. I would have been surprised even if there was any objection from the residents, given that Taylor is a national icon. So I don't think she would have run into any of the same difficulties that Mr. Brooks did all those years ago. But in fairness, there was even discussions on a political level as to how everything would go over as smoothly as possible. There was encouragement from pretty much everybody involved on the Irish side. And it wasn't one of those situations which we often hear of in boxing, where a promoter talking about a fighter coming home or talking about a prospective fight is pure lip service. There was a genuine effort made and a lot of groundwork laid in order for this to take place. And really, excuse me, and really, it was Serrano who just pulled the plug in it. And it was a pretty straightforward process for her and the people around her, being Jordan Maldonado, her trainer manager, and Jake Paul, who's her de facto manager, I guess. I guess they understood that to wait is of huge benefit to Serrano, in the sense that Taylor won't be better next year than she was in April, right? Like, at this stage of Taylor's career, she is in slight but conspicuous athletic decline. In actual fact, that actually made her victory over Serrano probably the best of her career, to my mind, because she's not the athlete that she used to be purely just through organically aging, right? And if that is the trajectory that she's on, why would Serrano not wait and maximize her chances of actually winning, particularly in Croke Park? If you're coming to somebody's backyard where you think, okay, if it goes to points, they might get the benefit of the doubt, you probably want to stop her in order to make sure that that doesn't happen. And the longer you wait, the greater your chances are of stopping her. Now, Serrano herself, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I've heard, rather, was absolutely on board to come to Croker. We were both in, obviously, New York at Madison Square Garden after the original fight, and she was excited by the prospect of it. And I think she went as far as to say, well, Katie has come to my hometown. It's only right that I go to her home country for a rematch. And then the mood music around that sort of changed. And I think part of the reason for that was, while Brian Peters and, say, Taylor's team were working on the prospect of a homecoming, obviously Matchroom were trying to negotiate the contract with Serrano for that rematch. But Matchroom had probably overextended a little bit in their negotiations in order to get the first fight over the line. So they had made promises pertaining to the rematch, one of which I believe was that Serrano could walk to the ring second, no matter what happened in the first fight, which, if listeners aren't accustomed to boxing or aren't used to sort of following it, like, the champion always walks second, and it's sort of a prestige thing to walk second. But, like, Serrano, I think, had it even in the contract that if there is a rematch, I'm walking second regardless of what happens, or something along those lines. And, like, obviously when it came to negotiating the rematch, then Matchroom were like, whoa, you know, like, let's roll back on that a little bit. There's still a little bit of dialogue to be had here. Whereas Jake Paul actually was looking at that and saying, no, well, look, you promised us this. If you're going back on the promise, then you can piss off effectively. And that's how it probably broke down on a negotiations level. A few little details like that. That wasn't the only one, just an example of one. And that's why we didn't get it in the autumn. I truly believe it would have happened in this month, probably in the middle of this month, if not the very start of November, had those complications not been reached. But equally, had Jake Paul and Jordan Maldonado not realized that to actually wait until next spring or summer maximizes their chances of probably achieving one of the great victories in women's boxing history.
Yeah, of course, Katie, I think 37 now in July. So that's kind of age she'll be. But getting back to will it be hard then to get that over the line with that team in place with Serrano? Is Jake Paul going to be a stumbling block to Eddie Ahern? And what's the relationship, the dynamic there between the two of them? They seem to be getting on well. They were very, it seemed very friendly enough promoting the fight the last. They did a little cameo there before the weigh-in the last time. All seemed to be going well, but I heard rumblings maybe that things kind of might have broken down afterward. What's your
Yeah, they definitely broke down afterwards. I'm pretty sure Hearn is trying to sue Jake Paul for, I don't know, a couple of $100 million or something. I don't know what the figure is actually, but for defamation. So I would say communications between them will be kept to a minimum, but I wouldn't say that precludes the fight from happening. And I think negotiations next time around will actually, in theory, they should be smoother, because I think Serrano, between now and spring or summer, when they'd be looking at having that fight in Croke Park, will have that missing piece of the jigsaw. She wants to become undisputed at featherweight, and she holds 3 of the 4 belts now. So she needs 1 more to become undisputed. I think she can fit that fight in with Erica Cruz between now and fighting Taylor. And this is only a hunch, but I feel as though if she was the undisputed champion, if she had that sense of completion at featherweight, she'd be even more keen to return to the Taylor thing and extend her legacy that way. So I think part of the reason why Maldonado and Paul felt happy enough to hold off and taking the Taylor rematch was that, well, we also have this undisputed thing at featherweight that we can go after in the interim. So it's not like Amanda's going to be sitting twiddling thumbs, So if she gets that out of the way, I can't really see too many stumbling blocks. Of course, as you say, Jake Paul, I mean, look, he's erratic, and I don't really want to talk about him either. You know what I mean? Like, because I just don't know a great deal about him. I would imagine he's pretty combustible, and who knows? But ultimately, as we've seen many times in this sport, if the figure on the check is right, and to be fair, and if Serrano has very little left in the sport to achieve other than to go back to try to avenge that defeat to Taylor, then why not?
Do you think he's helped the cause, the last fight, promoting it? Do you think he's given it more exposure? Was he a good thing or a bad thing to get himself involved in the last fight and get involved in Serrano's camp?
I think he did elevate the sort of status of the last fight, in the sense that I know it's a bit of a cliche when it comes to speaking about people like Paul and YouTubers and that sort of thing, but it does expose a fight to an audience that wouldn't otherwise be exposed to it. And I think a lot of younger people are curious about Paul, or follow him religiously, and may have looked at this Taylor Serrano thing at the time and thought, like, I'm interested in that if Jake Paul's involved. And obviously the stories of the individual athletes were compelling enough that it might have drawn them in as well. So I wouldn't go as far as to say he's had like a net positive impact on women's boxing, because I think a lot more people deserve a lot more credit than he does for its explosion in recent years. But at the same time, I don't really view him as a great hindrance to boxing either. He's what they would call in business a disruptor. And as you know well, boxing needs a bit of disruption now and then. So no harm, I suppose.
If it does go ahead, let's say next summer, is that going to be her final farewell, or do you looking at Katie? It seems as if she wants to go on forever. And do you think she'll bow out at that point, at that juncture, or will she go again? I know there's talks of other fighters in the midst. They're saying Kris Cyborg could be a kind of a cross, could be a fight there to put in play. What do you think is the plan then after it?
I don't know if she's even thought that far ahead, in all honesty. And it's one that she might be asked this week in London. But my hunch would be that if she got the Croke Park thing, and if it was a national sporting event, and like a moment that would stand the test of time, that we'd be talking about in 20, 50 years, that can't be beaten at that point. And that you've done so much over the course of 20 years of boxing competitively. And that maybe she would think, you know what, everything after this will be an anticlimax. I am 37. I don't want to be punched in the face for the rest of my life, and maybe right off into the sunset. It's just difficult to envisage Taylor doing that, because we know how dedicated she is to her sport, but how obsessed she is with it, and the extent to which it plays a role in her life. Like, people often try to get to the bottom of Katie Taylor's personality, and they want to know what's actually behind the mask, or what's behind the sort of front-facing public personality that we see, because she gives very little away. I think the reality is actually that there isn't a huge deal behind it. I think she's quite a simple person, very intelligent person, but somebody who lives a simple life. And the three pillars of her life, if you like, are family and friends, church, and boxing. And boxing actually probably consumes 3/4 of her time and what she's thinking about. So to take that away from somebody, or for somebody to take it away from themselves, if you like, by walking away from it, leaves an absolutely enormous void. Everybody who listens to the podcast who follows sport will have heard of the cautionary tales of professional athletes retiring and not quite knowing what they're doing next. And I think Taylor conceivably would be a really heightened, accentuated version of that, because boxing has been so major in her life. But also she has people around her mother, Bridget, her coach, Rossina, my manager, Brian Peters, who know all of this. They know all of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure they will be trying to make plans for her afterwards, or help her to find a path in her life afterwards. And there may be no concern whatsoever. It's just my knowledge of it is that I don't know what she does next, and maybe that makes it harder for her to walk away. But equally, I think if the reality hit her in front of 82, 83,000 people, that sort of sense of, I guess that sense of gratification would never be greater. And I think she would know that.
Yeah.
And at that point, I think it is best to walk away, particularly when you are 37 and you're in her profession.
Yeah. It would be kind of a sense of a completion, wouldn't it? If she won, by the way. If she lost to Serrano, we could get a replay back in Croke Park. Could be even a bigger money spinner. But she's got a good group, tight-knit group around her. As you say, Peters, Ross, they're not going to, if they know she's on if her health is at risk or whatever, they're going to pull the plug. But at the same time, if she was to prolong her career, Gavan, can you see her being able to kind of adapt her game plan? As we know, she's kind of she loves to get caught in the pocket there. She likes to get into the nutritional fight. Sometimes, you can see Ross shouting at the corner, like, to get out. She gets involved. It's high intensity, it's high speed, it's high energy. And as you get older, it's harder to keep that up. And as we know, she doesn't really have that knockout punch where she can go into a fight and floor someone in the third round. So is it a case of, like, she has to finish at this point, or can you see her being able to adapt her game?
Well, just to touch upon your first point there about the close-knit group that she has around her, that in some situations you would have the sense with a boxer that it is the people around them who have made the decision for them almost, that you need to step away. And I would say with Taylor, it would be the absolute reverse of that. Like, it would be absolutely her decision as an individual. And I think the influence of the people around her will only go so far, actually. Like, I get the impression sometimes they'd need like an American sitcom style intervention, like a banner across the living room, Katie, we need to talk to you, sort of a thing, with Eddie, Brian, Ross, Bridget, her brothers, sisters, etc., in order to convince her. But to answer your second question then about adaptation, it's a very difficult sport to adapt in, right? Yeah. Like, there's only so much you can do and so much you can change before you get clocked, ultimately, because it's risky. Like, we see in golf, obviously lower stakes physically, a golfer might try to interfere with their own swing or just fine tune it a little bit, and then suddenly they're 8 over par their next round and they're world number 155 2 years later, and you're like, where did it all go wrong? And in boxing, the jeopardy is that if it goes slightly wrong, you possibly get your lights knocked out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The thing is with Taylor is that as good as she is technically, she's not especially reliant on some of the fundamentals. Like, she rarely actually uses her jab, right? And it probably is the most important punch in the sport. And I would say if you were to adapt or find a way of lasting that little bit longer, a jab would be absolutely paramount to that. And she doesn't really deploy it to, I guess, with the regularity that would make me believe that would be an option for her. So no, I think the thing is, if she does continue, somebody's going to beat her, right? Yeah. This is how the story plays out invariably. And that would be a really dark day for Taylor and for Irish sport if or when it does happen. And I think from an Irish perspective, what I would love to see would be for her to win a Serrano rematch and to ride off into the sunset undefeated, 25-0, nice kind of, there's a nice sound to that.
Yeah. Like, usually this podcast, I don't have, if there's an Irish, it's usually Irish people who are competing in sport here in America. But like, because Katie's has fought so often in Madison Square Garden, and she's based in Connecticut. She's lived in Connecticut for the last couple of years. She trains out of Connecticut. I wanted to kind of keep track of her as she fights, as she comes to the closing stages of her career. But at the same time, with Croke Park, you're saying that might be the final farewell. Do you ever see her fighting back in America again, back in Madison Square Garden? There was murmurings after the last fight. Eddie Hearn was saying that MSG people wanted her back straight away. Can you ever see her fighting back in America again?
Yeah, I think it's highly conceivable that she does. I think even the Croke Park prospect, and that's all that remains for the moment, could easily transpire to happen in MSG or somewhere in the States, right? It was the backup option going back to April. The people in Madison Square Garden were genuinely blown away by that fight and were desperate instantaneously afterwards to have it back there, to run it back in the same venue. So I think that would definitely be an option if Croke Park couldn't be brought over the line for whatever reason in the spring or the summer. I also think if she doesn't finish, say next summer, and that's if or when the Serrano rematch happens, that Cyborg fight that you mentioned could easily go off in somewhere like Vegas, you'd imagine, because it would be more of it's a crossover appeal fight where you'd have a little bit of the MMA community out in force as well, back in their girls. So I could absolutely see her, fighting in the States again. And as you say, like, she is based in Connecticut. I mean, to the extent that she owns a home there, like it is now her adopted home. So I don't think America has seen the last of her, regardless of whether or not she fights there again. She has a community of friends that she's built there over recent years. And I wouldn't be shocked if she decides to live there for a little bit longer, even after she retires. So no, I don't think you'll be rid of her at all.
So the fight is on Saturday. It's on in it's London, Wembley Arena. It's going to be 10 o'clock, I think, UK. What that usually ends up to be around 11 or midnight, doesn't it? So you're talking.
I'd say it'll be 10, 10:30. I don't think matchroom main events tend to go too far beyond that. If I was in Ireland, I'd probably be tuning in from around 9:30 or 10. If you wanted to make sure that you catch the Taylor fight. So I don't know how that translates to East Coast time. What's that? Half five?
Around 5, half 5, Eastern time. So it's a nice time to watch a fight. So that's on the zone, Gavan, isn't it? So it's pay-per-view. So people who have watched the last fight would have who watched it online would have been on the zone as well. Not necessarily pay-per-view in that it's not being sold as a sort of a one-off event. So if you already have a DAZN subscription, for example, it's just part of your subscription. So it's a subscription streaming service, and it's part of that regular subscription. Yeah. And Carabajal she's also unbeaten, isn't she? She's 19-0. So someone's as they usually say, has got to go. But we're hoping that it's not Katie's that's going to go. So in terms of women's boxing, Irish women's boxers, Gav, I see you've been busy at the European Championships there recently. There was a sensational medals haul there with the Irish female boxers. Give us a lowdown on what happened, and would we see any of these boxers actually turn professional? Yeah, that's a good question, actually. I know Kelly Harrington, who people will know as the Olympic champion at lightweight, Katie Taylor's successor, and who won European gold, completing her set last week, in that she has now become only the second fighter after Taylor to be world, Olympic and European gold medalist. She'd been approached certainly after the Tokyo Olympics to turn professional, and she just said no. And she likes her life as it is, didn't really fancy the politics or the more nefarious side of pro boxing, and wants to defend her Olympic title. She'd be the first Irish athlete since one of our own, Dr. Pat O'Callaghan, in 1928 and 1932 to win back-to-back gold medals for Ireland. So that's enough of a carrot for her for the moment. Just to speak to the achievements of that team and to put a little bit of context on it. So Ireland's best performance previously at Europeans would have been at the European Games in 2019, which were ostensibly a European Championships. And they won 3 medals that time, the Irish women's team. And they won 7 last week. Now, it is a competition taking place without Russian competitors because of geopolitics.
but equally, like, or even still, for them to win 7 and 3 goals was phenomenal. And there was a nice backstory to each of them. Kelly Harrington completing the set, as I mentioned. Amy Broadhurst, speaking of hat tricks, has won a world championship, gold, Commonwealth gold, and European gold, all within the space of, I guess, 8 or 9 months, which is just an unbelievable breakout year for her. And maybe the most remarkable thing about those achievements are that they've come 3 kilograms above her natural weight. She actually would prefer to be competing at Harrington's weight, but because Harrington is who she is and the reigning Olympic champ, she's the incumbent at that spot. So that's the Olympic spot. And Broadhurst's weight that she's won these 3 medals at this year isn't an Olympic weight class because there are fewer weight divisions in Paris. So Broadhurst will have to make a call as to whether she maybe keeps going up and puts on another 3 kg, or maybe comes down and tries to challenge Harrington at the Irish Elites in the new year. And I don't know if that will be something that the IABA will actually permit happening. They have a habit of, well, look, I'll be careful what I say there, but sometimes, let's say, some of these champions are kept in cotton wool to an extent, or they're not entered into the elites, or they withdraw with injury, blah, 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 you know. So that's an interesting sort of rivalry that's been brewing for a long time. There used to be plenty of animosity between them, and now they actually are quite fond of each other, which makes it all the more interesting if they do have to compete against each other for that same Olympic spot. And and then Aoife O'Rourke, back-to-back European gold. Again, it's a brilliant story insofar as, you know, she won it as a real bolt from the blue in 2019, and 3 years later she just goes and does it again and retains her European crown, figuratively speaking. And it's an amazing story for her family. Like, they're from Castlereagh in County Roscommon. Her sister Lisa is a world champion, won world championship gold at the same Worlds that Broadhurst did earlier this year. And she's also a midfielder for the Roscommon senior team. So just an unbelievably talented family. You kind of think, imagine being their cousin at Christmas dinner, you know, you'd be like, you know, oh yeah, you're learning a bit of guitar. Yeah, class. Like, I'm a world champion and Roscommon midfielder. My sister's back-to-back European champ. But, and yeah, I mean, pretty much every medalist, actually. Like Christina Desmond from Cork took silver. She had won European bronze in 2016, but she had actually only been called up to the team at relatively short notice because Lisa O'Rourke, the world champion, had been ruled out through injury. So that speaks to the depth that we have in Irish women's boxing, that somebody, I won't go as far as to say was taken off the couch, because I'm sure Christina would have been training, but that she wouldn't necessarily have been gearing towards these European championships, and that she went and nearly got gold. I mean, her final was pretty close. So things are looking pretty nice now ahead of Paris, but busy year to come next year to begin with.
Yeah, just so there's going to be another Irish fighter on the card Saturday, in Katie's card, Gavan Cully's fighting there. What's the prospect of him winning?
Yeah, it's a pretty good fight for Gary Cully. He's a nice man. I think, is he 25, 26 now, Gary? He's 14-0, 8 knockouts. He's 6'2" and he's a lightweight. So it's like anatomically interesting to see a guy who weighs so little being so tall, and he gets a lot of elasticity and sting out of his punches because of his body shape, I think, or at least partly because of that. He's fighting a guy, Joad Belmedi, who's also unbeaten, 16-0-3, I think, so 3 draws. And it's a real opportunity for Gary Cully to showcase himself in front of a wider British audience, I think, because, British and Irish, obviously, but in the sense that a lot of the people who will be tuning into the zone will just be British boxing fans who might not have seen him before or might have seen him once. He only recently signed with Matchroom and Eddie Hearn, and I think he's somebody who, when he was managed by NTK Global, slipped the radar in Irish media terms and maybe didn't get the coverage that would have been commensurate to his talent. Now, that's partly his own fault in that he chose his management team and they chose war, I guess, with the Irish media. But he is somebody for Irish boxing fans to be really excited about. I think he's got I think he's got the minerals and he's exciting to watch. Really eloquent guy, like really well spoken. So yeah, I want to keep an eye out for if you have the early evening free over there on Saturday. Gary will be on probably, I don't know, maybe 3:30, 4 p.m. Eastern time. So
okay,
keep an eye.
So there's a couple of other, there's a couple of other boxers, Gav, that have fought in America. That we just want to give a just briskly touch on. Where's Michael Conlan's career standing at the moment?
Yeah, he's back out in December in Belfast, I think. And I think his career is, it's on pretty solid footing. Obviously, he had that devastating loss to Lee Wood 2 fights ago, but bounced back with a pretty impressive victory in Belfast, and he's out now again in Belfast. And I think it's sort of a case of keep on winning and wait for the title picture to clear up again, or just wait for a little avenue into title contention. I know he'd love the Wood rematch because, geez, I mean, 9 times out of 10 he probably wins that fight. It was just a disaster at the end that caught him. So yeah, I mean, I'd say almost things are going to plan for him. The Wood thing was a massive blip, obviously, but he's still very firmly in that picture. I think he proved himself that night to be a world-class professional fighter. We obviously knew he was a world-class amateur, literally a world champion amateur. So I think he turned a lot of heads and even staved off a few doubters in the States and in the UK that night. And it's just maybe just about the waiting game now for Conlan and making sure he does get that second opportunity at a big belt.
Okay. Dennis Hogan, who recently won in Australia, who's based in Australia, he's fought here before. I've seen him fighting the Barclays Centre, and Gary Spike O'Sullivan, who fought in Barclays a couple of months ago. They're looking to kind of get a fight against each other. I see some talk there online with the two of them. Is that something that's going to be like a kind of an undercard on the Katie Taylor fight, Serrano, or is it going to be a separate fight, or how will it come about?
If I was them, that's what I'd be looking to do for sure. I think you're guaranteed to have an audience there to begin with the greatest respect to the two lads. And, they're both immensely popular in Irish boxing circles. I'm not sure at this point if they would sell out the 3 Arena together, because generally speaking, you're going to need 5,000-7,000 more casual sports fans to fill an arena like that. Katie Taylor has that broader appeal where people would. Whereas Spike and Hogan, excuse me, with Spike and Hogan, I'm not sure the significance of the fight would really be felt by the public necessarily, the ticket buying public. So why not go on that Katie undercard if that happens and fight in front of probably a lot more people than you'd fit into 3 Arena. They're both really friendly guys, both great servants to Irish boxing and great ambassadors, I think, for it. And the thing is, they're very friendly with each other as well. They have a lot of respect between each other. They've said for a long time that if one of them got a title, they would give the other the opportunity of taking it off them. And Dennis Hogan had a sensational win over Sam Eggington, a Birmingham man down in Australia, 2-3 weeks ago. So he has an IBO belt now, which is, you know what, for a long time, the IBO hasn't been recognized as one of the 4 major sanctioning bodies. I kind of think all of them are atrocious, so why not just throw the IBO in there? And if the belt means something to the individual, then good for you. And that would be a fight that I think would interest a lot of Irish boxing fans for sure.
Yeah, Hogan has persevered over the last couple of years, hasn't he? He's, I think, 37 now, and he was unlucky with a few calls, but he finally got that belt a couple of weeks ago, as you say.
He should have been world champion in Mexico 3 years ago. He fought a really feared guy at the time, Jaime Munguia, and he was robbed basically on the cards. It was in Monterrey, Mexico. Munguia was a Mexican, and one of the more controversial ones that we've ever seen really in Irish boxing. And he should have been a legitimate world champion that night, and he made Munguia look ordinary, and others have done the same since. He almost burst the bubble a little bit. So great. Hogan is a great story, one for a Google if you're sitting there and you have a bit of spare time. I've done a few bits with him in the past, as have other Irish boxing journalists. Really well-spoken guy, well-traveled guy, and just a great Irish sportsman, I think. Yeah.
So on the flip side, a guy who's up and coming is Callum Walsh there, King Callum Walsh, who's out in the West Coast. He's had a couple of wins under his belt, Gav. What's your take on him?
Yeah, really talented prospect. Has all the infrastructure around him in that he's trained by Freddie Roach. He's got Tom Loeffler, Gennady Golovkin, and the Klitschko brothers, former promoter, involved in his career. He's got the support of Dana White, who keeps putting him on the UFC on-demand sort of platform, and Fight Pass, excuse me. I was just trying to think of the name of it. He hits hard. He looks good. He sounds good. He's a Cork man. All the materials are there.
All right, super, Gav. I think we're just about to cut out there in less than a minute. Thanks a million, Gav. Really appreciate it.
Take care, Mike. Anytime.
Okay. Hopefully we'll see you out here soon again for maybe a Colin fight or a Katie Taylor fight.
Absolutely. Loved it.
Me away, you Santy, my dear Annie. Oh,
and that's all for this week. Let us know what you think by leaving us a comment on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at The Long Haul Podcast. You can follow Gavan on Twitter on the handle at Gavan Casey, or read all of his stories on the42.ie. Our next episode will be with Tim Herlihy to discuss his new Irish whiskey called Lost Irish. Slán go fóill, and thanks for listening.
Girls, can you dance the polka to me? Why, you Santy, my dear Annie. Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka? And when we got inside the house, the drinks were passed around. The liquor was so awful strong, my head went round and round. To me away, you Santy, my dear Annie. Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka to me? Why, you Santy, my dear Annie. Oh, you New York girls, can you dance the polka?